Hello, everyone, and welcome to Good, Bad, or Bullshit. I am Crofton Steers, the John Wick of this podcast. With me, as always, is the Neo of this podcast. I'm talking about Bo Schwartz. Welcome,
Uh,
Bo.
Whoa. I
And
know Kung
and,
Fu.
and of course, the Ted of this podcast. I'm talking about Michael
Ted.
Hodgins.
Do you know any classic
Michael,
lines from Bill and
Bill and
Ted's
Ted's
Excellent
Excellent
Adventure?
Adventure.
It's been a while since I've seen that movie.
Yeah.
Uh,
I've never seen it,
our-
actually.
What? You guys need to be excellent to each other
Ted's-
and see that movie ASAP.
I think so.
Yeah, but it's like this hazy memory from my youth.
Bogus. But yeah, they're making a new one.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the way Hollywood goes, right?
Bill and Ted Face the Music. Actually, Bill and Ted have been, Keanu Reeves and Alex Winters have been trying to make Bill and Ted 3 for a long time, and they've been pushing spec scripts and doing all sorts of stuff. And finally, it is happening, and I think that it will be excellent. So I'm stoked. That's a revival I can get behind, unlike a lot of this other stuff. How are you two doing, Bo?
A new Terminator movie
Well,
coming out.
there's a new Terminator movie
Schwarzenegger
going
still
out.
be in it.
But to answer Crofton's question, his nice hosting question, I'm actually doing pretty good. Thank you for asking. We had an exacerbating hour and a half pre-show fixing computer problems. So now that I'm not doing that, I actually feel pretty great.
If this show is known for anything other than witty repartee and refined conversation, it definitely is computer problems and technical problems on the back end. Speaking of which, Michael, are you with us still?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, but sometimes you disappear and sometimes you come back and sometimes you're.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
We will. Yes. Well, I have some kind of interesting news. It's not really that interesting, but I am now an Uber driver.
Are you?
I don't
Are
mean
you
to laugh.
an-
This is an insane thing.
Are you
It
an
is
Uber
funny in
driver
this-
or a Lyft driver or both?
Both.
Oh my God! You heard it here first.
Will do, or so the internet told me. And the funny thing about it mostly is because it makes absolutely no sense for me to do this in any way other than I'm like, why not? I have made like 5 drives total. So yeah, I'm not exactly earning money doing it, but it's sort of fun. You can drive people around town.
Yeah. So you're working for both companies at the same time. Is there one?
Working for is a stretch. I have downloaded the apps, and then sometimes the phone tells me to pick someone up when I ask it to.
So which one is better?
This is also the interesting thing. They seem to me identical,
Yeah.
so identical that I'm like, why don't they just merge already into one app? Like there is this so little, like the documentation you need. I mean, and this is probably dictated by laws of the land where you're driving. Identical, the processes are identical. Like the interface is almost identical. I'd say like Lyft's app itself is a little bit more user friendly, but marginally so. They're the same thing.
Do you get it? Do you to use parlance that Bo would understand from the Epic Game Store? Do you get a greater cut as a driver from one or the other of the money that you take it?
I think they're both based on the same thing, which is like surge pricing. So like if it's a busy time, then the price what you get goes up, and that'll vary slightly between the two based on when they have less or more drivers. But honestly, it's all based sort of around rush hour stuff. So the same. And I asked a few people who I drove. I'm like, oh, do you use Lyft or Uber? And some people were like, I use both. And some people were like, I like Lyft and I like Uber. But I didn't see some person liked one or the other or over the other. I find it sort of strange that there are even.
But
But
I guess my question is like getting back to it is like if somebody takes a $10 Uber ride, I get charged $10. I know up front that it's $10. How much of that $10 are you getting? And would you be getting that same amount of that $10 from Lyft? Are they both giving you $8 and keeping two? Like, how does it work?
that you make slightly more on Uber, but that might just be because demand is higher. I don't really know the ins and outs of that. Like short rides, you get like $4. You don't get much, or you drive someone halfway across town, you get like $18. I don't know.
Okay, you have not enlightened me in any way. I feel like
Not
I feel like what I want to know is who is like, is there like a competition to get drivers? Like, because you can only be on for one of those two at any given time. So
the same time. This is what I've realized. So if I go, this is what I do, and what I read other drivers are doing. I do this so limited. Like I'll turn on both of them, and then if one gives me a ride, like if Uber goes bloom bloom, you've got a ride, I accept it, and then I turn off the Lyft app, and then I pick up the person, drop them off, and then I turn back on the Lyft app, and then I might get a Lyft ride, and then I turn off the Uber app. And apparently that's what all the drivers do because you never know which one you're going to get, so
that's
you want to get
insane.
more as your time. If you're out there doing it, you don't want to just sit around in your car or whatever.
What about
Anyways, it's yeah.
What about, have you ever considered doing like Uber Eats?
No, I don't want to bring food to people. Go into stores and pick up someone's like greasy delivery. No, I don't want to do that.
Now I want greasy delivery. Thanks for that. Hey,
Super
I'll just
random
order
and funny
some
thing.
Uber Eats right now. I could do it.
Dude,
Or as we used to call it, delivery. No offense to Uber Eats and all those things, but I'm like, I was able to pick up the phone and get restaurants to deliver forever. I don't get what the difference of this is. The only difference is that like a lot of businesses don't have to spend money on staff anymore. So you don't have to, like, it's the same when I go to a car dealership or whatever, they're like, "Oh, do you want us to get you an Uber back home?" They used to have a shuttle driver, but they don't anymore, nor do they have a shuttle. They don't need to because they can just like, have these deals with Uber or whatever. And to me, delivery, like you used to have a guy that worked for your restaurant that did delivery. Now it's like, whatever, we do just eat or skip the dishes or Uber
honestly,
or
like it makes sense. Like if you were, because this is apparently what some people do. It's like it's an Uber, then you turn Uber Eats on. You're like, okay, I got a delivery. I'll take that. And you take it, and then you drive to whatever part of town you drop it off, and then maybe then you just get like, and then you're like, okay, now I'm a cab, and then you pick people. It's actually more efficient. It's like an integrated system. Like, does it make sense for the pizza delivery guy to just forth? Like, what if he's going back downtown and picks someone up in his car and drives them there? Like, it's really a lot of sense. A traditional cab or delivery, very like integrated, and I get how this stuff makes sense, and I think it's neat, and whatever. I like driving random people around. I will say though, cab people more than the quiet cab people. Some people, they get in their and they're just like on their phone. I'm like, oh, whatever. I don't mind driving them. But some people want to chat your ear off, and that's more entertaining. So yeah,
Yeah, no, I got the
people.
impression chatting to people that they more appreciate most people, like when I would get there, I would have like a rapport going with the Uber guy or the Lyft guy. Just before we go into our new model of selecting a topic this week, I just noticed, Mike, that I'm not sure if you've been noticing it too, Bo, that Mike's been cutting out. Do we want to take a
Yeah.
pause and have him like leave and come back or something like that to see if that fixes it, or
No, it won't fix it.
it won't fix it?
Input settings or something.
No, I'm done fixing things for today. We're going with what we got.
We're going with what we're going. Okay, fine. So this is the second episode of the sort of new model. We're still working out the kinks. Last episode, Michael Hodgins brought with him a topic which he shared with the rest of us. Neither Bo nor I had any idea what he was going to talk about. The topic ended up being bird watching. We discussed it and gave verdicts as we're wont to do. This time it falls, and this is a test of the new model. It falls to Bo Schwartz to select the topic. So be
Brace
very
yourselves.
brace yourselves. We will see how this goes. So
Don't oversell it. It's not going to be like that.
I'm gonna pass it to Bo. Bo's gonna say,
What did we
gentlemen,
decide for a sound? Do we have a
the
sound?
topic
We're using the
today.
bird sound.
Oh, that's right. I'm delivering it. All right.
Okay. All right. So Bo, without further
a
ado,
bird appears in the sky. What does he have? Wait, there he is. Oh. He delivered it on a napkin.
oh, nice.
All right.
Props. Who
So,
says we don't have a
Our
budget?
topic this week, we should say this episode, our topic this week is cyberpunk.
Ah,
The
interesting.
genre?
The genre. Is it good, bad, or bullshit? Is it a bullshit genre? And the reason I bring this up, and the reason why this is a fascinating facet of conversation, and you can tell me what you think about it, but at one point I was curious. So the word cyberpunk, first of all, I think it's actually trademarked, at least in the US, if not in other places, is actually trademarked by the person who does a pen and paper role-playing game called Cyberpunk 2020, and there's going to be a cyberpunk video game. What's interesting about the term cyberpunk is that you tend to think of seminal works of written fiction like William Gibson's Neuromancer as cyberpunk, but it's not actually any of those authors, or Philip K. Dick, I think is often thought of as the first author of cyberpunk style works. It was actually coined by another person, a science fiction author, to describe it, the genre, and then that person said that that was a mistake to call it cyberpunk, and has been trying to walk it back, and I think through a period of his life stamp out the notion of the genre as being like not reflective of what it is. But you know,
Who is this person?
hang on, let me look it up here. Cyberpunk, Lawrence Pearson. Lawrence Pearson has attempted to define the content ethos of the cyberpunk literary movement, stating classic cyberpunk characters were marginalized, alienated loners who lived on the edge of society in generally dystopic futures where daily life was impacted by rapid technological change and ubiquitous data sphere of computerized information and invasive modification of the human body. So, there was a term coined for it, and then he was trying to come up with a better term to coin that genre of fiction. But cyberpunk, unfortunately, has stuck. Like cyberpunk, in a colloquialism, it's like low life meets high tech. But most cyberpunk works are are forms of science fiction and social commentary that are way more nuanced and involving than a bunch of punks who have computerized guns, basically.
Gritty is also like
sure, a noir kind of
cyberpunk
atmosphere. Yeah,
It is funny because I get like you come up with a term for a genre and then you don't like your own term or whatever and you're trying to walk it back and all that. But for me, what I find interesting about cyberpunk is a genre is I've read a lot of not only do I enjoy cyberpunk in general in works, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I think it's good, bad, or bullshit. Because I think it's more complicated than that. But I definitely enjoy cyberpunk works and concepts, but not uniformly. Like sometimes I'll be exposed to something that is considered cyberpunk and be like, oh, this did do it for me. But that said, when I hear something is cyberpunk, it attracts me more towards that work. And like art, people say, I don't know much about art, but I know art when I see it. I know that there's a lot of things that are associated with cyberpunk. Human modification, obviously, science fiction, futurescapes like Blade Runner-esque, dirty noir, corporation run futurescapes, sort of a punk ethos or whatever. What is Mike? Remind me the graphic novel. I think Warren Ellis with Spider Jerusalem.
was that Transmetropolitan?
Transmetropolitan, that sort of 1980s punk mentality. A lot of that stuff. Like I like art. I know cyberpunk when I see it, but I wouldn't necessarily be able to read you even taking out a Wikipedia article or whatever, say like, I can tell you perfectly like this is cyberpunk or this isn't. Mostly it's a style of science fiction that is rooted more in our real world, I find, than stuff like the other side of the galaxy type science fiction or
Also,
so
think
go
of
ahead, Mike.
yeah, when I think of cyberpunk, and this is probably true of lots of science fiction. Um, Whenever an author is trying to create something, they're trying to think about the future. They're trying to project trends, possibilities, especially kind of the harder science fiction, the one that's more like looking at what's happening in society now and envisioning what things will be like in 100 years or something like that, as opposed to like fantasy science fiction. But so they're always trying to project ahead and create this world that doesn't exist. But I find that what ends up happening is it ends up um, it's like stamped on the time in which it was created. So like when I think of cyberpunk, I think of the 80s. Now, it was
Right.
never none of this was ever set in the 80s, but it has this 80s grittiness to it of stuff that was happening in the 80s, like looming like Cold War stuff and like crime on the rise and rich and poor. Like it just had this grittier how we think of a lot of things from the 80s and the sci-fi that was generated in that time, which spawned, of course, this whole genre, cyberpunk. It's like stamped from the 80s for me. And as a counterpoint to that, I would just think of like, just envision Star Trek The Next Generation. When you think of that show and like the drapery of it, I look at it, it's meant to project in the future, but all I think of is the 90s if I see an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. Like it's stuck in its own time. And I guess that punk is its own genre. It continues, there's new works, but yet it still has that kind of, and I think it's this, but I think that's kind of part of the appeal of it too, that it has this film noir, this grit, this kind of, it's dystopian. It's almost always like this hard future technology, but still like the problems, that society hasn't overcome these problems. It is no way utopian, if anything, dystopian. And I don't know, those stories tend to draw people in. Like we like things like stories, which can be cyberpunk, but aren't always. They're like, but there's something about those things which I think, to me, so totally, like I feel like if you look at the real world, we feel like we're making sort of grand progress, and cyberpunk kind of offers this future of like, yeah, technology is moving, but you're gonna have the problems. You're still gonna have these deep issues, 100 years from now. Just gonna have a technology overlay.
Right.
So I got.
Oh, sorry. Go
you
ahead.
guys go continue. You're having a conversation about.
Oh no, I was just gonna say about the '80s element. Like I definitely agree with it, but like one thing, like I agree with what Mike is saying, but one of the, it's all about sort of the works of cyberpunk that you kind of identify with, and I have this weird relationship with cyberpunk where the works that I identify with tend to be the pop works and not the creative impactful works. Like I would argue the two most impactful pop culture two most impactful creative works at the beginning of cyberpunk, no offense to Mike Pondsmith and the cyberpunk pen and paper game, is Blade Runner, the movie, and Neuromancer, the William Gibson book. I have tried to read Neuromancer multiple times and I have always dropped off. Blade Runner is like, it's like a good movie, but I never got into it to the level. I love the aesthetics. I even preferred. I read "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," the book that it's based on, and I almost prefer that in terms of getting involved in the narrative. There's something that I didn't latch onto. There's a coldness and there is to cyberpunk in general, but there was something about Blade Runner that didn't necessarily do it to me. But on the other hand, stuff like The Matrix, which I think people would consider pop, much more pop culture cyberpunk, or the Deus Ex video games, I love those games. I love the Matrix, and I definitely don't like. I consider the Matrix cyberpunk, but I don't consider it 1980s. I definitely like it has that the feel of the late 90s, early 2000s for me. And I appreciate the 80s ethos of where it comes from, but I do think a lot of works that are cyberpunk now kind of reflect, and maybe this is to Mike's point, reflect the time that they were developed in.
Yeah. So I wanted to clarify what I said at the top about the genre of cyberpunk, because I actually misattributed the the history a little bit. I believe there was an author. There have been cyberpunk style works before. Philip K. Dick, and there were short stories coming from William Gibson. But it was this Bruce Betke who he actually wrote a short story called Cyberpunk. And it was from that story where he coined it by titling it Cyberpunk that everyone took that title and started describing that and attributing that to the works like Philip K. Dick and all that. And it was this Bruce individual who wanted to walk back the term. I don't think he coined it as in much that he created a story called Cyberpunk, and it was to describe, I think, that atmosphere. But he was trying to call the genre new romantics, and as a pun on new romantics, a term used for new wave pop music movement that had just occurred in Britain, but the term did not catch on. But he was
Wonder why.
But it's just one of those things where it's like, you kind of think like, oh, these authors invented a genre, but I think it came about more organically, where one person wrote a story, titled it just whatever, the cool thing for their thing, and then everyone took that title. No one remembers the short story, clearly. It's in the Wikipedia page, so someone does, but none of us know that history, that it was a short story whose title, got co-opted to describe a genre. And
it's funny because so much of it, like I mean, and maybe this is my own reading of this, rather than, obviously I'm not reading the Wikipedia entry on Cyberpunk or anything like that, so I don't know all the history. But when I think of it, and I said already, I think the 80s, and I think of so many, like it's the imagery of it that, so like to Crofton's point, Blade Runner, made in the 80s, the movie, really it's like in some ways that's almost the epitome of what I think of in terms of scenery, the drapery, the overlay of it. But yet I've also read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and they do not seem that similar to, like, when I read the book, and I've read a lot of Philip K. Dick, I don't think cyberpunk necessarily. The way it's written, and he did a lot of his writing in the 60s, it has a different feel. I mean, it's certainly science fiction, being a great writer. I don't always think cyberpunk, but if I think of, like, say, RoboCop, the movie, I'm like, I think, and a whole bunch of 80s films like have that, because at the time, again, it was just like thing of the 80s, this grit meets technology, and especially sort of clunky technology, where it seems like blocky, just because of the technology of the time. Like now it seems almost silly to write a science fiction story now, in cyberpunk, sort of, in my mind, can only be done as an homage to it, because if you look at technology now and think about what things will be like in 50 years from now, it'd be silly to think it will look anything like in the 80s. It won't, clearly. But I mean, in some ways that solidifies it as a genre, because there's nothing wrong. Like, I like the imagery, it's cool, it has a place, but it solidifies it as a genre in the sense that, like, to assume that imagery is anything that's going to happen. So it almost becomes more like like fantasy, really, to write something in with that drapery and that sort of imagery that we associate with cyberpunk.
So are you saying, and like I'm just curious about this, that like cyberpunk has had its day, and that essentially all new cyberpunk content at this point is redundant content, and that its moment is past? Is that it?
Well,
think that it's like
you focused on the stereotypical aspects of what cyberpunk is: film noir, lowlifes. The subjects of cyberpunk have never been more prescient, and modern cyberpunk doesn't look like the 80s aesthetics. Now, I know we have the cyberpunk video game coming up, which really captures the 80s aesthetic intentionally, with
that's
intent.
what I mean.
But there's room. So a particular television show I consider Cyberpunk, although I could see an argument not, is Mr. Robot. And Mr. Robot is a show about a hacker. And rather than be like 20 or 50 years in the future, it's present day. It's about a hacker living in the world today. But it has all of the things that are consistent throughout Cyberpunk stories that we haven't discussed, which is decentralization of government and corporate control, Illuminati, secret agencies who control, who puppeteer states and companies, corporate espionage, paramilitary, just proxies, like just that things are never what they seem. There's always a person behind the person. Substance abuse, Mr. Robot has the low life. The characters in there is street samurai, right? In that show. That show is as cyberpunk as it gets without actually being any of the stereotypes you mentioned, and that's a great work of contemporary pop culture in the cyberpunk show. Have you seen Mr. Robot?
I've seen Mr. Robot. It's a great show. On your recommendation. It's really good. I would not consider it cyberpunk personally, though I do, and I wouldn't.
But you wouldn't disagree with anything I said about what it has, which is
I just don't think
cyberpunk.
It fits that aesthetic, because I think you could basically take Dune, that's cyberpunk based on a lot of those things, but Dune is not cyberpunk.
No, it's epic fantasy. Like, I wouldn't put it in that genre.
Talk about those things like drug use, but
technology. The social commentary is prescient. Like, it's very one-to-one.
But look, that doesn't mean. Look, most fiction is gonna have the kind of commentary on society. Like that's what.
But on technology, right? On the fiction side of things, like it's society
but that's
dealing
also
with the rapid technological change that they're facing. And the fact is, we are currently facing rapid technological change, right? Like
because
cyberpunk era is now.
That's what science fiction does. Like science fiction is dealing with us. That's the broader genre. Cyberpunk is the subgenre, and it has specific things which are attached a lot to its imagery.
It's not a subgenre of science fiction.
It completely is. Like, what do you mean? You think it's its own genre?
You could say, I guess so, but like, I feel like in science fiction, there's a lot of license. The science part is very dubious, right? But and not to say that everything checks out in a cyberpunk film, but that the predictions and near future things are much more prescient and immediately relatable.
See, look, have you read, say, Orcs and Crake by Margaret Atwood?
No.
For that matter.
I've never read any Margaret Atwood. You're cutting out a lot, so I'm not hearing
I'm sorry.
sentences.
You should read Orcs and Crake. You would like it.
I probably
Margaret Atwood.
I can't.
Absolutely would. I don't know what you think Margaret Atwood is about, but if you read it, you would be like, oh, it's about genetic modification, near future things, corporate control. Like, it basically exactly what you said cyberpunk is. That's what Orcs and Crake is. But I think it's cyberpunk, and I would not call it cyberpunk, even though it fits everything what you described as cyberpunk. And I think because it doesn't have the...
Yeah, we can't hear you. Like, you're cutting out a lot. I'm not understanding half of what you're saying, unfortunately. And
Mike, just to add on to Bo's thing, we can really not understand you at this point.
Can you just disconnect and come back real quick?
Yeah, hold on. I'll try to come
back. So we are taking a pause, folks.
The show brought to you by Blue microphones and Apple laptops. They're reliable.
Welcome back, Michael.
Any better?
No, it doesn't look. It
doesn't appear.
I think you should tell everyone to stop using Netflix in your house.
Yeah, but
okay. How about? But I'm not. I'm getting normally I get lag from you guys.
Yeah, you're sounding a bit better now, but your camera is still. Anyway,
the camera's not related to the. Hold on, let me try one more thing.
I feel like keeping on going because I have something to say too.
I know. It's funny because I wasn't sure if this topic would be good. I barely had a chance to say anything. You guys have been so but Mike's dropping out so much. It's just gotten really worse.
Hello, is that any better?
I mean, we'll have to see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we don't know right yet.
What about that? Is that any better? Worse? Better?
Yeah, it
So
seems
far, it's
better.
better. Yeah, seems better.
Okay. Well,
All right.
uh,
So yeah.
I'm.
So
So just to recap, Mike was selling a Margaret Atwood novel to Bo about saying that he doesn't consider it science fiction, but Bo would enjoy it. Doesn't consider it cyberpunk, but Bo would enjoy it anyway. Bo, please continue.
Can
right.
I
So
finish my thought?
well,
Because
I mean, I don't want to get down too far of a rabbit hole about what is and what isn't science fiction and shit like that.
that's what the.
Yeah, but that's like an endless. That's an endless tunnel.
No, because
of like,
but you're one thing,
cutting
and
out
what I'm
again.
going to.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. It's just I know
Yeah.
you're trying to express an idea, and I'm not going to be able to
Yeah.
interface with you in a way that's not going to be frustrating because you're dropping out.
All right.
Yeah,
That's
I
why.
don't-
That's also why I'm trying to
Believe,
discourage.
then, I
That's
mean-
why. Well, that's why I'm just trying to discourage the argument about what is and is not genre fiction, like cyberpunk. I think, like, it
Yeah,
might make for a good conversation, but we're going to crosstalk a lot, and it's not.
Yeah, there's got to be short clippets, I think, for it to continue to work. I would just say to both of your points, Mike's point about cyberpunk being a subgenre of science fiction, I 100% agree. I think that like if you cyberpunk is science fiction, it's just a type of science fiction. But I would say that to Bo's point about Mr. Robot, like Mike doesn't see it as cyberpunk, but it like you could Bo does, and that's the thing about these genres. It becomes tough to label. Like I did a
I have
cursory Google search just to see, and tons of people
Yeah,
have
well,
classified Mr. Robot as a cyberpunk show. But yet I 100% see why it would be debatable.
Let
right?
me
Like,
just put it this way, because I think I'm being too binary about how I'm saying it, where it's like it's not this, it's not that. We're both being that way, and what I would suggest is that genres prioritize or are known for particular archetypes more so than others. Like you can do a western that also has elves in it, and it's a fantasy as well as being a western. You know what I mean? Like, so then you like your genre definitions fall apart when things mix up. I would say that cyberpunk features more. The science fiction is not front and center, even though the technology and the laser lights are all in your face. You're never really confronted in most cases with you're never really confronted with scenarios in science fiction that really go in depth or challenge big science fiction type ideas, I guess, if that makes sense. Like it's more prescient. Like the fact that you have a fully functioning AI in a cyberpunk story is really not that unimaginable, considering we're working on AIs and we're very near to that. Same with virtual reality and understanding neuroscience and experimentation with drugs and all the things in a cyberpunk setting. To me, like that stuff's like it just kind of takes a back seat, if that makes any sense. It's front and center, but like when I think of science fiction, I think of like big ideas, like those big like. There's a book I was reading, got like 5 pages, but where like a race of alien people had 3 genders, and what does society look like when they have 3 genders? And it's just like that's not cyberpunk really at all, even though gender issues do come up in it. But we're not going to other worlds and exploring alien races. Like Ender's Game isn't really cyberpunk, right? It's like this is
no,
they're fighting an ant race somewhere else. Like there's a distinct silo where the science fiction of it only extends to certain aspects of it, and I feel like it's not the most important part, if that makes sense.
But I sort of think it is the most important part. Science fiction is like to the extent that like Lord of the Rings is an epic fantasy, but there's the Carnival Row, the show that was just released on Amazon, is another type of fantasy, and it would be like an urban steampunk. Like steampunk is a classification, a subclassification, right?
Yeah.
Just like cyberpunk is a subclassification of science fiction.
Because of steampunk and in cyberpunk, the science fiction, I guess, deals with specific technology. And science is like geology and medicine. Like science, broad terms, isn't computers, but science. It isn't robot arm. Like it isn't specific science fiction imaginings, right? Like there isn't a cyberpunk genre where we talk about geology. Like we're the geology of a planet somehow matters. We're like in a Star Trek episode, the geology might be what's causing a problem affecting the indigenous peoples of the planet. And so when I guess that's what I mean about that conversation is what I'm saying. Like it's just the science fiction. Okay, there's the science fiction in it, but it's there's very specific topics, and it relates to the technologies that impact us, like specifically computerized and cybernetic, like body enhancement type things.
For sure,
computers.
It's specific.
Basically.
It's specific to something.
Our society today, where science fiction is like it could be like anything.
But science fiction is speculative fiction. It speculates on what the future would be like, and that sort of stuff. Sure. So cyberpunk, for me, it falls into that bucket. It's just like another thing that cyberpunk constantly does. I find, and I used the Matrix as a reference point earlier, but there's often some sort of hype neurospace or like hacking or whatever, where you're in like computer world, virtual reality. That's a trope that comes up often. And honestly, that's one of the, with types of fiction or types of anything, you enjoy certain things, but maybe you don't enjoy other things so much. Like the corporations and all of that stuff that are omnipresent in cyberpunk, I'm not as big into, but I really do like the virtual worlds or whatever, when they go into these larger sort of they're giant crime sprees like in Neuromancer that are happening in a virtual space. Like that's something that I get on board with. I generally like cyberpunk. My thing is just I'm curious, is its time past? Like, is this an outdated? Like, do I like it for nostalgic reasons? Is it now over? And I'm not sure. Would it appeal in the same way to the new generation as it appealed to me? As Mike said, kid growing up in the 80s, 90s, and stuff like that. I'm not sure. I don't have an answer. I don't necessarily have an answer for that.
Do you guys have like a favorite cyberpunk work in any genre, Mike?
But just to answer a bit, because I do think that its time has passed in the sense that it's still like cool, right? Like people like it because it's fun. I mean, I think at this point, kind of genre, really, like I mean, I think take as like social commentary may have passed a little bit, and then now it's more like an overlay on a story. You can tell any kind of story and you can put an overlay on it, like fantasy and dragons or whatever, or you can put a cyberpunk overlay on it, and that's cool. It adds feeling to a piece, right? And maybe that's part of the feeling you're going for, say post-apocalyptic fiction, right? Which seems perennial. It's always good. Everyone loves good post-apocalyptic fiction. So same with cyberpunk. You can bring it up. I think maybe it's commentary, I'll say, but it, like anything, it could still elements of today, and you could put that overlay on it, and it would be a good story. And I mean, really, ultimately, with any fiction, you want to get someone to engage with the thing and hopefully take something away. So I don't think it's past. I mean, what I like, I like Philip K. Dick stuff a lot. And when I was reading a lot of his short stories, I never really thought cyberpunk, but as we talk about it, I'm like, yeah, it clearly is. And with his, I goes into the virtual worlds and that kind of thing as well. It's like, what is reality? Like whenever you see Philip K. Dick stuff, like who am I? Or is this real? Or is the other thing real? Are my memories true? Or are they like things where it's like mind bending? What's the real narrative? What is the fiction? What is the truth? What can I believe? I love that kind of stuff. K. Dick is like, but
to answer, like I also like Philip K. Dick stuff quite a bit. I would say that I like skew more to I've showed my hand a bit. Like obviously, The Matrix is something that, I like that. I like the pop pop stuff that in a way has a glossy sheen. I like there's a novel by this author Neil Stevenson called Snow Crash, and it is very akin to what is going on in the Cyberpunk video game that's being released based on the pen and paper game, and I like that a lot. I didn't really, as I mentioned, get into Neuromancer, which is one of those definitive works of Cyberpunk. And on the video game front, like whenever there's a video game that has Cyberpunk elements on it, I'm like an easy sell. Like to Mike's point about the that you just put a layer on it. It's like you could take a concept and be like, let's do that concept, but make it Cyberpunk, and Croft and be like, oh, I'll play that, you know. So I get into it, and that includes like obviously the big games like Deus Ex, but there's this game called Flashback: The Quest for Identity or whatever that came out when I was a kid. It gets remade constantly or re-released constantly, and and just that graphics were limited, but it used like certain animations to evoke a mood, right? Like, and it's the mood that it evokes rather that makes it sort of attractive. Like you wouldn't necessarily want to live in a cyberpunk world, but like it's really cool to visit it. You know, like generally it seems like they seemed like pretty shitty places to live. Oh, and I know this is going to be a bone of contention, I'm sure, with Bo, but Altered Carbon, which came out on Netflix, I think it was based on a book. I really like that series, and I'm totally on board for season 2. So
I'm gonna give the benefit of the doubt to the books, maybe, because you know it's just like a glorified action show. It was pretty boring as far as Cyberpunk is concerned.
Don't listen to him. It was awesome.
So, Bo, what's you?
Best work? It's tough. I kind of like them all, but I think I really like A Scanner Darkly. That's a favorite one of mine. You know, it's the movie, the Richard Linklater movie with the animated Keanu Reeves. I like that one a lot.
Classic Philip K.
I mean,
Dick
I've watched it like 4 or 5 times. Like, I love that movie, and
I've never seen that one.
It's so depressed. It's like it's a big downer movie. Like you if you like a good downer at the end of your movie, that's like top 5 downer movies. And it's not downer in a way, you know, like a downer movie might be like a family gets killed, you're sad they all got killed. It's even worse than that because it's not that dramatic. Like, it's not dramatic like some tragedy happened. It's like anti-tragic. It's so like a whimper, and it's just beautiful. Just the way you're just like, oh.
We should have a Scanner Darkly party and all sit on the couch and watch it together.
We should. It's super good.
And then cry.
But I think I have to say, like, my favorite like work of cyberpunk fiction is like, in terms of, I don't want to say video, I guess video content, dramatic arts, it's the Matrix trilogy, which there's a 4th one coming. They just announced it. And Keanu Reeves. Matrix
they made
4
2 others?
Yeah, they did, yeah. And by the way, those sequels are good. I'll fight anyone. Matrix is a compelling piece of video art. And then for books, I think the one I was just glommed onto and loved the most was Virtual Light by William Gibson. It was like my first. I'd read that before I'd ever read Neuromancer or something. It was about these Google Glass sunglasses, literally before Google Glass was ever even a thing. And you could put them on and find out all kinds of information. And it was hot new technology that corporations were all trying to vie to kill. And I believe, if I recall correctly, the protagonists had a, prototype that could hook into, like, I think government information feed or something like that. You could just find out information by putting the glasses on. And at the time I read that, we didn't have smartphones. We didn't have cell phones. I don't even think we had car phones when we read that. Like, the whole concept that we're living today is in this book, and we are dealing with the ramifications of having this technology. Like, Google Glass is not a thing due to privacy concerns, which is sort of an unexpected turn, but we would have it if it weren't for damn privacy concerns. If only we could reduce human rights, we'd have a better cyberpunk future. But yeah.
What about
by that you mean more dystopian, horrible view?
And I say that, but like in China, law enforcement are using facial recognition to accost people. Like, if you were caught on a CT camera jaywalking, which we did an episode on this. We're super guilty jaywalkers on the three of us. They could they don't have glasses, but pretty much they'd probably put glasses on you, facial recognize. Crofton Steers jaywalked 46 times at the intersection near his house. Arrest for the Chinese government. They would get you that way. So
supposedly the protests in Hong Kong recently, they were knocking over those.
Sure.
Those,
you don't protests. You're cameras. In a database forever. And now, anytime you come up on a policeman's virtual light glasses, they're like, oh. He rioted in the Hong Kong riots. We should arrest him. At least detain him for questioning and intimidate him.
Yeah, see, I don't. Hey, question. Speaking of like what is and what is not cyberpunk and our favorite cyberpunk works, is Terminator cyberpunk?
No.
See, it's funny that you're like. Because I mean it's a good question because
having guns and robots.
Yes,
because like Isaac Asimov's foundation, like robot science fiction is not cyberpunk. It's decidedly not. So just because you have a robot from the future shooting shit up, it's not cyberpunk.
The time travel thing maybe throws it.
For me, it's I guess it's the 80s-ness, especially. I'm thinking of the original Terminator, the movie that's just called The Terminator. Like not thinking about any of sort of the sequels, and then him arriving, and then just like I don't know, like it feels.
Feel like I know what you mean. It has the feel, but the time travel aspect, I think, really. Because when we were talking about the favorite things, and I must say, my favorite 80s movie probably of all is the original Total Recall with Schwarzenegger and the like campy sets and stuff. But I'm like, I love it. And the remake of it, parts of it, and I'm like, I hate it. But because the overlay of the 80s, I don't know when that was it. It might have been early 90s.
It was 91, I think. But like to be fair, we're in Canada, and the 80s only came here in the 90s.
Yeah, and again, I pretty much, and again, I read the book version, which is we can sell your memories to you wholesale, is what it was called, the Philip K. Dick book. And again, didn't have that same kind of feel, but there's something about that movie that is so like cyberpunk in that way that like I like it. Like when they go to Mars and it's just like this cruddy thing with mutants and people. It's like I'm like I can't get enough of that.
But it is funny because the looks of those 80s properties, like and like the Bo, you may remember in Total Recall at one point, like one of the iconic scenes is when he goes in the bar with the three-breasted alien woman or something like. But it is like a seedier version of like the Mos Eisley Cantina scene.
They're not aliens, though, right? They're like mutants. Right,
they're mutants. That's right. Yeah, they're all mutants and all that, and but like that scene where he comes in and all this, into that area, it really does have that kind of like if they had just say that instead of on Mars it was on Earth and whatever. Like, although I don't think like going to Mars. Well, I guess Mars is far enough. Fuck. That takes it out of what I would consider necessarily cyberpunk, but it's
get your ass to Mars.
I mean, Blade Runner
consider this a divorce.
Blade Runner has the outer worlds. Like they don't go to the outer worlds, but they do reference that there are many outer worlds. I think maybe the Mars part's okay. I still can call it cyberpunk.
It definitely wrestles with a lot of themes that I find generally interesting, but just the layer and the gloss of cyberpunk I find interesting because it correlates with hard sci-fi, so which I gravitate more to as I get older, as opposed to the fantastical like borderline fantasy sci-fi that I loved so much when I was younger. Right. Now if there's added believability to it, I'll buy into it further.
Same. I like that, and it's funny because again, like I was bringing up Oryx and Crake, which Margaret would describe solely as speculative fiction. But again, you're talking about like corporations, genetic mutations. It doesn't have the same overlay, and that again, I don't want to get hung up on this. Like, is cyberpunk really just visual cues that set it off. It's almost like it's the set design that like goes such a long way to be like what feels like cyberpunk. And if it doesn't have that, it doesn't necessarily feel like it.
Well, that's why I like Scanner Darkly as an example, because that just takes place in, is it in L.A.? It's some California city. It just looks like there's nothing about in that film that screams like giant buildings and that dystopic future. It's just, you know what I mean? Like, but it's still distinctly in that genre. That's why I say like a lot of the hallmarks for me, which is why I look at something like Altered Carbon and be like, nah, that ain't it. Is because it's missing a lot of those elements. It does have the paramilitary aspect to it, but it's just, I don't know. Maybe I just don't like it. Maybe it is cyberpunk.
In
but
Altered Carbon, well, yeah, in Altered Carbon, it has a lot of like that whole identity.
It does have that
replicants and like your consciousness goes into your stack, which is transferred from body to body. Like there is, I got into this book at one point, or I really tried to get myself into this book called The Wind Up Girl, and it's considered biopunk essentially, but
I read some of that too. I think
and it has a lot of like it deals with a lot of like the alterations of stuff like your foods and stuff like that. And
Thailand.
Yeah. So what was so challenging about it is whenever you read a friggin' science fiction book, you have to buy into like the science fiction lingo. Like, so if you're reading some cyberpunk book, you've got to learn, okay, like you read the first paragraph of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, it introduces like 4 terms that you're like, what the fuck is all this stuff? I don't know what it means, but you do eventually, right? That's how they get you. Like they disorient you, they throw you into this world. But here it was like, in that book, it's like, because it's set in Thailand and deals with a lot of Taiwanese culture stuff, there was like, I was lost because of the science fiction stuff, but also because of this other stuff. And they would even be talking about their fruits, which are like common fruits there that I have legitimately never heard of. So I'm like, is that a made up fruit or is that a real fruit? So it made it a very challenging read for sure. I didn't make it to the end.
I also didn't make it through that book, and in my head I was like, this is clearly written by someone while they backpacked through Thailand and just was like, oh, I'll use this experience to serve as a backdrop to my story. I appreciate it in some ways, but I also didn't make it through that book for some reason.
You guys have recollections of Akira or Ghost of the Shell? Those are also the two prominent. Akira and Ghost of the Shell are the two prominent cyberpunk anime, which I haven't seen either of them in a long time, but I did see the Ghost in the Shell movie, which I actually liked quite a bit. I thought it was quite faithful and good film.
I haven't seen either of them ever.
Oh man,
you need to watch Ghost of the Shell is good. Akira I think is good too, but it's been too long.
Akira I think of like watched it young enough, like in my
horror
teens.
Elements to it, right?
It's definitely kind of messed up, like, and it makes me kind of feel uneasy when I think about Akira. Like at the end, when his body's like exploding with pain, it's really weird.
Whoa, spoilers!
Yeah, and it's a downer too, Akira, from what I remember.
I mean, cyberpunk generally is a downer genre, right? Like, think of the ending of Star Wars, and then think of all the cyberpunk content you've read, and how many are similar. New Hope. Like, think of A New Hope and the end of A New Hope.
Hero's Quest, like, it's a little different in that sense. It follows a really specific.
I'm just saying, you don't feel good at the end of the film. You
feel good at the end of The Matrix. Neo is like, I am the one. But it's very hopeful.
Yeah, but see, that's, you know what? You raise an interesting point, because I was thinking about that about me as you guys were saying it, how the nature of cyberpunk is to be kind of like a downer or whatever in many ways. And I'm like, wait a minute, all the ones I like, when I classified them as like pop sci-fi, it's the ones that have like, even the Deus Ex games, you become like this super powerful dude, you take out all these guys or whatever, and then it's like you are Neo or whatever.
Yeah, but in Deus Ex, you can pick your ending, and one of them is to kill yourself or something like that, which is
yeah, whatever, but like that's like whatever.
It's a happy ending.
Yeah, it's at the end. It's like it's like press one of three buttons or make some goddamn choice. It doesn't change all the hours of being a super badass whatever guy. And it's the same with Neo. It's like you're right. That moment at the end of Neo, at the end of the Matrix, where he is like, like
But he's
I
not
can do all this shit.
he's not victorious, right? Like it's sort of implied that.
Yeah, but I mean, come on, Bo. Like the sequels, the first movie is like perfect, and then the rest of them are all kind of,
Oh,
self-indulgent.
okay, we're gonna do
garbage.
this. All right.
No, wait, no, just wait. Before you guys get into it, I just want to talk about the ending of that first movie. In that ending, the last scene of that first movie, he's like in a phone booth and it makes a call where he's talking essentially to Agent Smith and the all of the the computer people, the whatever those creatures are, I forget. But bottom line is he's like pretty much saying he's going to go kick all their asses, and then the movie literally ends with him flying into the air towards the camera, and then the credits roll. And it's like a moment of like super empowerment where he's like telling the bad guys off, and then he's off to take. So it's kind of like the complete opposite of a downer. It's like, oh yeah, kick their asses, or like you feel you get on board. And so that the fact that I'm attracted to those things goes to show that, like, yeah, maybe I have problems or dealing with the heavier themes of Cyberpunk, like A Scanner Darkly. Like you guys were selling me on it, and then you're like, yeah, it's really heavy, it's really depressing. I'm like, oh
Think
yeah,
about
maybe I won't
what
watch it.
about a movie like I mean, it's unfortunately Tom Cruise, though he's not so bad, but A Minority Report, like that's a pretty solid.
Yeah, that's Cyberpunk, I think.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a good movie.
That's
I don't-
another Philip K. Dick one.
Yeah.
It's
Do you remember we watched that at the cottage, at your old cottage, Hodgins, and your dad would leave the room and come back. Mike's dad for it's just like he cannot sit still to watch the
span of
entire
a
movie.
goldfish.
And so then he comes in and, like, in a regular movie will be like, who's this character? What's going on here? I don't understand, or whatever. But what's funny about this is it's a fucking cyberpunk movie and it's super complicated and there's all this stuff going on, and he would leave the room and come back and be like, what's this? What are they doing there? We watched it on VHS, which was very cyberpunk.
Yeah, and then it's like, go back outside, Dad. Yeah. Anyways, that's a good movie.
So okay, I'm the host. So let me just bring us all into to verdicts here on Cyberpunk. Should we bring in the farm animals, Bo? Is that something that we still do with this new look?
I think that's something we can do. I'm just wondering what that hissing is, or is I'm hearing a hissing.
I don't know.
It's probably the corpse. The corpse are hacking into us live from
That's
our
true.
underground squat.
We're probably being monitored by Mitsubishi right now. But seriously,
Maybe it's one of the goats that farted or something.
I don't know. Here we go. Verdict time, everyone. Here, we're bringing in the farm animals. You guys ready for a verdict time?
And
Here we go.
I can't hear the animals, but I'm assuming.
Order, I said.
Order in the court. All right, order in the court, everyone. So I'm not going to go first because it's my topic.
Yeah, you
That's
chose
the
the
rules.
topic, so you get the. Normally, the host would choose who goes when and where.
We're still
but
ironing out
you-
the details.
That's right. I'll go first. I actually like struggled with this one a little more than I thought. I knew that I didn't consider Cyberpunk bad by any stretch of the imagination. My thing that I struggle with is was this just a great thing in terms of like 90s and 80s sensibilities that I, young Crofton, got really invested in, that I'm still nostalgically attached to, that is now being beaten into the ground by like companies to put out subpar cyberpunk works that are not even really at their core cyberpunk. Now, I admitted whenever I see the label, I'm like, oh man, I'm interested in checking that out. Like it is possibly the subgenre of fiction that I am the most into. And I actually, like, we talked about a lot of works on the show, and I think there aren't really that many more seminal ones that we have not touched on. There may be a few, but like really, I don't think it's an overly saturated genre, but I do think it's back up on the rise. So the thing is, that I was struggling with, is it actually still good what it definitely was to me in my younger years, or has it reached a point of being bullshit? And I think I am going to stand and say that Cyberpunk in 2019 is good. And
Wait. There's the horns.
and I think it's good, and I think it's good because of all the elements that I mentioned earlier. And it's not the things that most people will say, which is struggling with the weighty themes of identity. All the things that Bo mentioned earlier, which I think like are all really interesting themes. It relies a lot more for me on what Mike said about it just being cool. And for some reason, I think the worlds of Cyberpunk are really cool. Like when I see them, I love the atmosphere. I love the vibe. It just feels great to consume shows or read books or play video games in these worlds. And so I keep coming back to them, or reading graphic novels for that matter. Do they often have super awesome stories as well? Yes, but I think that is not what gets me in the door. And if I'm being perfectly honest with myself, there's something cool about the atmosphere that grabs me each time. And for that, I am going to say that Cyberpunk is still good.
All right, I'll go next.
We're going last, but yeah, go ahead.
All right, I definitely think Cyberpunk is super good.
Duh.
It's the best. It's the greatest genre. It's my favorite genre. It's amazing. I do kind of like the notion that the genre is kind of misclassified or mislabeled, because I think Cyberpunk is more than the very tropey surface level stuff that Mike was describing. But that's just probably my nerd bent, and I'm willing to let that lie and just be like, whatever. As long as they make cool Cyberpunk stuff, I'm happy with it. Really looking forward to Cyberpunk 2077. Hopefully it will be a fantastic piece of work. Another movie I really liked was Blade Runner 2049, by the way. That was super good. It was a critical success and a box office failure, but it was really good. The original Blade Runner is good, too.
Downer.
All downers. The more downers, the better. That's the point of Cyberpunk. It's like how we fail to cope with the rapidly changing technology. And it's not meant to be preachy. It's just meant to be, like, horrifying. It's a form of horror. And you hate technology so much. You were horrified.
Oh, don't get distracted. Your verdict,
dude. I write science fiction. What are you talking about?
You don't write Cyberpunk. All right. Anyway, Cyberpunk's good. There you go. I'm gonna use another sound. Mike, your turn.
Initially, I was like, I'm now conflicted, because I was like, initially, I was like, oh, for sure, good. No, don't hit the thing yet, because I'm like, same as basically, I would echo Crofton's. I like it. There's something cool. There's something about it that draws me in. But the more I think about it, the more I'm like, really the genre is the overlay, is the drapings, which is essentially the stuff without substance, the imagery. And like because in my head when I was thinking of other stuff, like first of all, when I read a lot of Philip K. Dick, who is portrayed in movies, his stuff always comes off as cyberpunk. But when you read the books, it doesn't feel that way. It feels more of the 60s, like when he was writing it. When you read the books, I don't get that same. And I was talking with Bo about Oryx and Crake, and when he heard Margaret Atwood, he was like, "Oh, I would not like it." But it's pretty much
no. It's just because they're thick books. Sorry.
Good, but I'm like, yeah, and I would not classify something like Oryx and Crake's and the whole trilogy she wrote on. I wouldn't cyberpunk, but it's basically exactly the stuff. Just lacks that specific drapings. That maybe I'm wrong. I almost want to lend this to Bo, this book, to read to see what his take on it is, because it's so
books.
Cheesy. It's short.
I've bought 10 books in the past couple years and I've read none of them. I give up.
Anyways, so what it makes me think is coming back to Crofton's point of like, has it sort of blown its load? Is it sort of done? And I'm mixed, because I'm like, I love this drapery, this overlay, but I feel like that's the part with no substance. And that what I like is speculative fiction, near future sci-fi based in science. And that can come with the drapery of cyberpunk, which can be great, or it can come with something that's not that, and it still be great. But you can get a lot of hollow stuff that people are just like, yeah, I got my like bionic arm implant and they got tattoos and stuff, kind of badass, but really it's in garbage. And that stuff, I would be like, yeah, that stuff's for sure bullshit. But so, and I'm like, and is that where cyberpunk is at now? Because the kind of new speculative fiction isn't probably going to have that same overlay because it's not the 1980s anymore, and our view of future tech looks much different than does what cyberpunk does. So, but I mean, all that to say that I'm just gonna want to just play in that subgenre of sci-fi and make new stuff, and if it's fun and cool, then I'm like, yeah, it's good. So I'm sticking with good.
Did I play a sound for you? Or okay, you're sticking with good. There you go.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, you said don't play the sound.
Because I wasn't sure. I was maybe gonna go bullshit. I was gonna maybe be like, it's it's of the past, and it's just people wallowing in nostalgia.
You got your trumpet, so it's a trifecta today. 3 goods.
I just would say, because Mike's verdict made me think of something, which is the words on the page versus the visual sort of, I guess, panache of something like the Blade Runner movie. And I think that what Ridley Scott did with the Blade Runner movie is really notable. That's why the movie is talked of with such reverence. I'd say much more so than the book. And I think that visuals are actually very, very important to capture the essence of what of cyberpunk, and in many ways that those drapings that we find attractive or whatever are very, very important. Like I get Mike's point that it's not necessarily the core story or the core point of the story, but they are important in setting the tone of the worlds, which are often dark, punkish, depressing places, right? So it sounds like, Mike, it sounds like you and I had a similar sort of like
I think so.
thought process where it's like, yeah, we really, really like this, especially at certain points of our lives, but does it still, like, is it still but you have to,
it's the mass urbanization is really communicating the idea of these mega cities, which are frequently a feature of cyberpunk, but not necessary, I don't think. 100%.
Already exist.
I mean, yeah, but that's why the visuals of it are so prescient. But also, it's funny because we live in this like Instagram age and this Facebook age where people are taking like pictures of themselves a lot too. And I feel like cyberpunk, in the sense that the visuals, that like the street gear is important, the look of people is important. It sort of reflects or anticipated that about our culture. And that sounds like the chime to move into emails.
To move into, and normally I would move right in to say, hey, this is how you email us and tell us what you think about Cyberpunk. But what I would like to say first is, as part of this kind of new model, we're playing it fast and loose a little bit. So I figured this would be a good time to just quickly take a look at notable Cyberpunk works to see if we missed any. So I went online and did that while those guys were having a chat there, and I will say that we seem to have hit most of the what I would say are significant ones. Total Recall, Mike, is often considered a cyberpunk, as it was the Terminator. Like, it's included in here for films. There's other films that I haven't seen that I've heard a lot about, like Strange Days. Have either of you guys seen that one?
Oh, Strange Days is amazing.
Love it.
It's such a good movie. Oh my god, why don't I? God damn, that is a great cyberpunk film. Also, one of the few, we mentioned Margaret Atwood. I don't know if you consider her an author, but one of the few female voices who's done cyberpunk work, which I think is important. That movie is super good. It holds up too.
And there's, I guess like Ready Player One, which is not something that I would have thought of. I haven't seen the movie, but I've read the book, and it's a really good book. And for me, I would be like, oh yeah, that's a good one as well, and fits into kind of sort of that pop sensibility that I had as well. So, so if you have thoughts on, and by you I mean our listeners, have some thoughts on Cyberpunk and you want to let us know what you think, what are your favorite works? Do you for some reason think that it's overrated? Did you think we were out to lunch? Did you agree with us? Send us an email. goodbadbull@gmail.com is where you can reach us, and we would love to read that email on the air. You can also go to goodbadbull.com and see all of our old episodes. Good Bad Bull is sort of the keyword, because if you go to @GoodBadBull on Twitter and give us a follow, you'll find out when we go live on Twitch, which is twitch.tv/GoodBadBull, where we live record the episodes before Bo does all that hard work and magic to get them on your pod feeds in the next the days following the show. So we would love to hear from you guys, but you can also reach us individually. We are individuals, and you can reach me at Crofton Steers on Twitter. Bo, where can people reach you?
They can find me on Twitter at Bo Schwartz.
And Michael, if people wanted to take an Uber ride with you, how would they do that?
Need to take the Xylax pill and then get into an alternate state of reality, and then they'd find me.
Wow, that sounds complicated. I would just
Crofton-
follow me.
Crofton, did you say your Twitter handle yet?
I did.
Okay, perfect. So we got an email from a listener. Oh, well, that's the wrong sound, but we'll let it ride. We got an email in. We ask for emails every week, and what do you know? An email came in.
See, this could be you, listeners. This
Yeah,
could be you
yeah.
right now. What's happening right now?
So we got an email from a gentleman who goes by an online handle of Opera707.
Sounds like a cyberpunk thing.
Pretty cyberpunk name. I mean, I never know. I don't ask what their name is, but I don't want to. I think it's fine. He's Opera707. I think I've seen him in chat rooms before. He
Sweet.
says, "I absolutely love your show. It brings me great joy whenever I see a new episode in my feed. I have a topic to suggest. I would love to hear your thoughts on smoking, as I feel like it would provide some interesting conversations.
That's a good one.
Forgive me if you have done this topic before. Nevertheless, keep up the great work, guys." Well, we are all bringing topics to episodes, I would say, Opera707. So I'm sure one of the three of us, or two, may put that on their list. There's definitely
man, I
one
can't
that's probably
believe
not
we
going to
haven't
put
done
on their
smoking.
list. Yeah, well, it's probably because
That's
one of us has
crazy.
avoided the topic because they didn't want to talk about it. But if that's what gets brought,
We
that's what gets brought.
had a mini series of smoke watches when Bo
It's
was trying
true.
to quit smoking.
Are we sure we never did smoking?
I don't smoke. What are you guys talking about?
Greatest sound bit Bo ever made for this show.
Yeah, it's too bad I don't have the mixer hooked up, so you can't hear it. But I'll do it for the listeners. Just maybe I won't. We'll do it when we do smoking if it ever comes up. If it ever comes
bring
up.
it up for the. That's a good one.
Well, we'll have
Yeah.
to make it happen. I want to do that one for
He
sure.
also pointed out he would like the show a little bit more if Mike's Mike worked a little better.
Well,
Really?
Instead of FPS.
Fuck off.
You know, your sound cut out, so you just said "uck off."
Perfect. I got censored.
See, listeners, that could be you, and we could then do your topic on a future show. We really appreciate getting those, especially all that stuff about how much we give him joy. I like that a lot.
Yeah, no, people really do enjoy the show, and we've been climbing up in listener numbers, so more and more of you have been jumping on and checking it out, and welcome.
You know what the trick is?
Welcome
we
to
do less episodes. We get more listeners. Maybe people are like, "Oh God,
feel
I'll
like-
throw them a pity listen."
I feel like this is sending the wrong message, mainly to us and our ability to meet and record the show. So let's not take that lesson away from it.
It's true, Bo. I think this would be a good time for you to what was the word I was looking for?
Show.
End the show. That's it. End the show.
Wait,
Bo.
we didn't do any banter. We're gonna end the show early.
It was
What?
banter, wasn't it?
There's no banter?
Well, so usually
I thought-
somebody has something funny to say, and the other one gets pissed. But you're just like, end the show. I guess this
Okay.
ends like Cyberpunk. Like it's depressing end. Like, it's not
It's
tragic.
depressing
It's
end.
not super sad. It's just like a whimper of sadness as we realize how bad our podcasting recording equipment and routine is.
I'm sorry, Bo,
And
that you
I'm
didn't-
gonna do it. I'm gonna say on this depressing, real shitty note, let's just end the show and live the rest of our lives until we die.
What did you expect you were going to end up with?
It's
robot
ended. It's
penis
ended.
At the end of this?
Show ended. Okay,
No
I gotta
robot
cut it
penis
somewhere.
for Bo.